The next seam finish that we're going to work on is called French seam. This is used often for fabrics that are lightweight, see-through, such as chiffon, organza. You see it a lot in evening gowns, sheer blouses, down sleeves, even men's finer dress shirts that are made of a very fine cotton will have a French seam down either the side seam or the underarm seam. So the first thing you're going to do, you will take your fabric, your two rectangles. Instead of pinning them pretty sides on the table facing the ceiling, you're actually going to go the underside on the table facing the ceiling. You're then going to close it like a book and pin it raw edges together just like we've been doing. Only difference is you're looking at the pretty side of the fabric as you're doing the sewing. Okay, you will then bring it to your sewing machine, and this time, instead of using the 5/8, you're going to use a seam allowance of 1/4. That 1/4 is measured by the edge of the presser foot. So you'll put your parallel raw edge right along with the oval on the presser foot, and your perpendicular raw edge will go right on the edge of the foot to measure that 1/4 inch. And always remember to stitch forward 3 and then back stitch 3 or 4, 3 or 4. And I'm keeping the edge of the fabric at the edge of the foot. Now I'm going to go over to my ironing board, trim the threads, wake up my iron. I'm going to reduce the seam allowance in half to 1/8 of an inch. It was 1/4, remember edge of the foot, but we're going to reduce it down in half. Now you can measure it with your seam gauge. This is 1/8 of an inch right there. So you can bring that over and measure and draw a line and cut, but I know that 1/8 of an inch is half of 1/4, so visually I can cut right down the middle and know that I'm okay. Okay. Now what I'll do is I'm going to press that seam allowance to one side using some steam. And then fold this in half, and along that seam line, which is right there, I will press it and now I'll pin this and stitch it as if it were my seam. Now, basic seam allowance in the fashion industry is 5/8. When we sew clothes, it's 5/8 seam allowance that we use. Because this is a French seam, in the end, it needs to have that 5/8 seam allowance used. We already did 1/4, okay, when we stitched it the first time. So 5/8 minus 1/4 equals 3/8. So in order to make this garment fit the person it's intended for, this seam that you're going to stitch needs to be 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Looking at your needle plate, on our machine, 5/8 is marked right there. So if each one of these lines represents an eighth, and this is number 5, then you just count backwards. This line is 4/8, and this line is 3/8. So I will line this up with the 3/8 line, which is right there. You will take your parallel side, and it goes right along at the oval. Your perpendicular side goes right along the 3/8 line. And now we're going to go forward 3 and back 3 to 4-ish, and then stitch. When you get to the end, you will backstitch. Come back over to the ironing board. I will trim my threads on both sides, and then we will press this again with some steam. Flip it over and complete. If we've done a really nice job, you can compare your seam samples regardless of what seam finish that you've used, whether it's a French seam or serged and pressed open, or plain or serged and pressed, or all of these that we've been doing. This one is serged and sewn together. They all should be the same size. If we've done our math correctly, they should all still be the same size. And so far, I'm doing good. So far. So that one is a completed French seam. From the inside, they look completely different. But from the outside, they look the same.